This is Steve Lofgren of the U.S. Army Center of Military History. I'm with Frank Shire of the U.S. Army Center of Military History, and we are interviewing Lieutenant Colonel Marilyn Willis of Office of Deputy Chief of Staff G1. Today's date is 12 July 2002, and the subject of the interview is the terrorist attack on the Pentagon 11 September 2001. A couple of preliminary questions, Colonel Willis. Are you sitting for this interview voluntarily?
Yes.
And do you have any objections to government historians or other government people using the information contained in your interview, provided that you're cited and quoted accurately?
No objections.
Thank you. That makes our lawyers happy. Why don't we start with just what your job was in September? Could you tell us?
Yeah, I was and still is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel's Congressional Affairs Liaison Officer.
How long have you been doing that?
2.5 years.
Where is your office located in September? Was it E-ring, D-ring?
Right. My office number was 2E477.
Could you walk us through that Tuesday morning, just normal day? What time of work what time do you come to work?
Yeah, as any day, it was a typical Tuesday morning. But on every other Tuesday, the DESPER XO would have an executive officers meeting. So that Tuesday morning, we were scheduled to have a meeting starting at 0900. So I arrived to the building about 7 o'clock, because what I would like to do is get with my coworker and we would discuss those items that I would put out at the meeting. So I arrived at my office, and you know, for some strange reason that morning I walked a different route than I normally do, and I walked in with my eyes closed, and I would just feel on the cubicles to get me to my desk, to find myself to my desk blind, as if I couldn't see. And so I arrived to my desk and talked to my office mate and told her, here are the issues that I was going to put out at the meeting. And we both discussed that I needed to add a couple of other things because of what was going on. And so about 8:40, I grabbed my notes and I went off to a conference room, to the G1 conference room. And when I went in that room, it was extremely cold. So I went back to my chair and told my office mate, oh, I forgot my sweater. I grabbed my sweater and I told her, I said, I'll see you in a minute, and went on to the staff meeting. So there were 15 of us in the staff meeting, and as normal, the colonel will start to his left, and so he would go around the table. And he got to me. It was my turn to put out information, and it was about 9:30, and I was still talking, because normally I don't put much out at the meetings. And I looked at my watch, and I glanced down, and it was about 9:36. And I thought to myself, boy, this meeting is going real long, because we're normally out at 9:30. So about 9:36, right after those thoughts, and I was looking to my left at him, putting out information, you heard this loud explosion, just a horrendous noise. And so everyone sitting at the table was kind of in shock, like, what is that? And I heard my boss, who was sitting at the head of the table, go, what the hell was that? And he stood up, and as soon as he stood up, it went jet black dark. You couldn't see anybody, you couldn't see anything. It was so dark, if you put your hand on your nose, you couldn't see anything. And from that point, I immediately went down into a fetal position, where I was putting my head onto my lap, you know, and because I'm thinking something may fall or whatever. And so after that, I don't know, I thought I was dead. But when I came to, I was on the opposite side of the room, because I was sitting on the left-hand side of the table, and when I came to, I was on the right-hand side of the table against the wall, which would have been on the E-ring. And so I knew in there were two doors, and I figured from where I was sitting at the table, I was closer to the exit door, which would have been across the table from me. So I crawled to that door and I grabbed the handle, and I started yelling and saying, "The door's locked. We can't get out of here. It's jammed." But I didn't hear anybody else in the room, so I'm thinking I'm in there by myself. So I'm trying my best to get this door open, and I could not open that door. So at that point, I knew it was another door in the conference room, that if I could crawl around the table and go to a small stage, I could get out of that room. And I started to crawl, and it seemed like I crawled in there for forever. And I knew it had to be a long time, because I started to take my sweater off because it was getting so hot. And so I took one arm out of my sweater, and at that point, when I got the one arm out, I felt the stage. And I knew, okay, I'm at the stage, I can go to the left, and I'm at the door. And so as I was crawling, as soon as I left the stage, somebody behind me grabbed the waist of my pants. And I said, "Who is it?" At that point, I knew I wasn't by myself. I said, "Who is it? Talk to me." And she told me her name. She was an Army civilian. And I told her, I said, "Hold on to me. We're going to get out of here. Just don't, wherever I go, you go with me. Don't let me go." And so at that point, we finally crawled out of the conference room. So we were out into the big open area. So when I crawled out of the door, my head bumped into someone's rear. And there was another person crawling. And I told him to identify yourself. So I hit her on her hips, and I said, "Talk to me. Who are you?" And she told me who she was, and she was an Army major. And so I told her, I said, "We're going to be okay. Let's crawl to the left. I know there are windows to the left." So as we crawled out of the conference room, I could look to my right, because I knew it was a door, because that's the door I normally come in. I knew it was a door there. But when I looked at that door, I could see just red under the bottom of that door frame, and I could feel the intensity of the heat coming from that way. So I continued to say, "Let's go left. We're going to the windows. I know there are windows." And we crawled. It seemed like we crawled for an hour. I know it wasn't that long, but it seems like we just crawled and just kept crawling. And it was so hot, and the smoke was so thick. And regardless of how close you got to that ground, the smoke was just that thick down there. As we crawled out, I remember a male civilian walking past us saying, "Get up and come with me." And I yelled out to him, "No, you get down, the smoke is too thick." And I couldn't see him anymore. Then he disappeared. And the female officer in front of me started to get up, and I snatched her skirt down and said, "No, stay down. The smoke is too thick." And we continued crawling. At one point, the Army major in front of me stopped, and she said, "My knees are burning. My knees are burning." She had on an Army skirt and with nylon stockings. And she said her knees were burning. And I said, "Oh, I know it's hot." I said, "We got to keep going." So after she stopped, the civilian behind me tugged on me, and she started patting her throat, and she said, "I can't breathe, Colonel Willis, I can't breathe. And just go ahead." I said, "No, here, just suck on my sweater." Because the whole time I had just been sucking on my sweater from whatever was falling to keep myself hydrated. And so I passed her the sleeve that my arm wasn't in, and I said, "Here, just suck on this. Just spit it out, suck it." And so she was sucking on it. And when she started sucking, another person from behind her came forward. And he was so close, I thought we was going to kiss, because we couldn't see each other. And he patted on his throat, and I passed him my sweater. I'm like, "Here, just suck on it. We got to keep going." The civilian said, "I can't go. I can't go." And I'm like, please, come on. We got to get out of here." And so I told her, I said, "Just get on my back. Please, get on my back. I'll crawl and I'll carry you out of here." And so she was like, no, you got to go. And I'm like, no. At that point, I'm getting mad because time is ticking. I don't know how much time we have. And she's slowing down. I'm like, "Come on, please. We got to get out of here." So she crawled on my back, and I started crawling. But then I thought, I'm like, wait a minute. Where's the major? the major who was in front of me was gone, and I started yelling for her, and I couldn't see, and I'm feeling for her, and I'm screaming and yelling her name, and I could not find her. So we crawled on, and we finally got to a window, and I knew at that point it was two people behind me, a civilian and another officer. And I could not see anything. And so I'm thinking to myself, God, I hope I'm going the right way to this window. And September was a beautiful day, so I know the sun or something should have been shining through that window. I couldn't see anything. And I just stopped and prayed. And I'm like, God, please help me. I cannot see anything in here. And because you couldn't use your eyes, the smoke would just rip your eyeballs out. And so I'm crawling with my eyes closed, praying that I'm going in the right direction. And we finally got there, and I could see a small hole that the sun would have been piercing through, a small little hole. And we finally got to the window. And as we approached the window, there was an image of a soldier standing there. I didn't know who the soldier was when we crawled up there. And but I could see him with an object in his hand, looked like a printer or a fax machine or something. And so we got to the base of the window, me, the Army civilian, and the Army colonel, and we were sitting at the base of the window. Now the civilian behind me and the colonel didn't know why I had stopped. And at that point, the soldier took the printer or the fax machine, whatever this object was, and threw it into a window. And when he threw it into the window, it bounced back and fell into my lap. And at that point, I was scared. I mean, I was scared the whole time, but I was scared because I just knew I was going to die. And he picked the printer up again, and he threw it into the window again, and it bounced back. It did not break. And so at that point, the soldier who was standing there, the colonel from behind me came forward, and we took our hands and feet, and we just started banging on the sill of that window and kicking it and hitting it, and then it popped open. While we were kicking and hitting on it, the soldier and the colonel were standing in the windowsill. And at that point, I turned and I put my head out of the window. So the three of us had our heads out of the window trying to gasp for some air. And the smoke, you can just see the smoke bellowing out of that window. So the soldier was standing there and the colonel, and I turned to the civilian and said, come on, you going first. You're older, you got to get out of here. So the colonel and the colonel and the soldier lowered the civilian down out of the window. As they were doing that, another civilian just walked up. And I said, get down. I grabbed her skirt and I pulled her down, and she didn't say a word. She was just constantly patting on her throat. And so I said, here, suck on this sweater. It's moist. Don't swallow it. Spit it out. Suck on this sweater. And so she sucked on the sweater. As I was attending her, a person ran past us and jumped out of the window. And the soldier had already been lowered out of the window. And when I looked at the colonel, I said, who was that? Who was that ran past the window? And so we looked down on the ground and we saw it was the Army Lieutenant Colonel. And my colonel and I just knew he had to have been badly damaged because one of his legs were turned back and his arm was bent. It just looked like he had really broken something. And so my colonel and I had the Army civilian who walked up, and we lowered her out of the window. And as she was going down, she was saying that she was afraid of heights and she couldn't do it. And I told her, you're going to be okay, you're going to live. And so I'm just prying her fingers off of the windowsill because she wouldn't let go. So she fell, and unfortunately, when she fell, her arms and legs were flagrant in the air, and so she ended up breaking her hip or her thigh or something. She broke. And so that left the colonel and I in the windowsill. At that point, the colonel told me it was time to go out, and I told him I couldn't because the major was with me, and I could not find her. And he said, but we have to go. And I'm like, sir, we can't go. Why don't we just stay here and let you yell and scream, and people will come to the window, and we can get them out of here. And so we yelled and we screamed. It's like, come over here if you can hear us. Come to this way. We can get you out of here. And gosh, we yelled and screamed. I would say for about a minute or 2 minutes. And then he told me again, you gotta go. And I told him, sir, but, you know, I'm trying to buy time because I'm thinking she's gotta be right there. And so then I told him, I said, so, sir, let's be quiet. If you and I just be quiet right here, maybe we'll hear somebody crying or wailing and we can go back and get them. But we didn't hear anything in that window. So the colonel turned, he left the window sill, and he said, I'll go back and see. And he couldn't have gone an arm length, and I could not see him. And so I started calling for him. I'm like, sir, Colonel, you got to come back, sir. And he was back that quick, so I know he couldn't have gone far, but the smoke was so thick I couldn't see him. And so he just looked at me, and he shook his head no. And at that point, I think I know I lost it, because I know that girl was right there with me. So there were men at the bottom of the window, which is, I understand, A&E Drive, and that's a smoking area. So as we were lowering people out, those men were down there catching these ladies, and the soldier who went out. So at that point, the colonel told me, we'll get out of the window now. He gave me an order, and I knew we had to both get out for us both to survive. And so the guys at the bottom of the window, when I looked out, they had found, it looked like a dumpster, some kind of dumpster they had gotten, and stood on a dumpster, and it looked like a broken piece of a ladder. And one guy was standing on the dumpster, the other guy had the ladder on his shoulder, and then men had stood on top of this ladder trying to reach this second floor window where we were, and it still was just not high enough. So as I climbed out of the window, I'm climbing down on men who had stacked themselves up, and then onto this ladder, and then the whole thing started to crumble, I guess because of the weight and the heaviness of each other, of us being on top of each other. And it was a Navy lieutenant commander down there, and he said, just jump, I have you, just jump. And so as I called it a human ladder, as the human ladder collapsed, he caught me, and I was some chair, or they set me on something out there, and they were trying to remove me, and I told them no, because I wanted to make sure I saw my colonel come out of that window. And so they rebuilt this thing for the colonel and got him down the same way. But when I got out to A&E Drive, everyone that we had lowered out of the window, I didn't find anybody. The two civilian ladies, the one officer who had gone out, and the soldier, they were gone. And after the colonel came out, the colonel went around the building and disappeared. I didn't see where he went, but I knew in my mind that he had come out of that building. So I knew he was safe. And from there, they took me to Center Court. Where in Center Court, I don't know. I remember somebody lifting me up and taking me out, and the sun would feel like it was just baking me because I was so hot. I couldn't open my eyes, and I was trying to tell them I couldn't breathe, but I couldn't talk to tell them this. I could just only pat on my throat to tell them I couldn't breathe. And from there, I don't know what happened. I'm told afterwards, this is what was told to me now. I was taken to Center Court. It was a major out in Center Court who knew me and who saw me and said, oh my God, she is not going to make it. And I could hear someone saying, get some water. And I could hear them going, we don't have any water. And I could hear somebody saying, we need some oxygen. And I could hear somebody else responding, we don't have any oxygen. We have to do something. She's dying. And I could feel myself just wanting to sleep. And so then I could feel some coolness on me. It felt like water or something was being poured on me. And then I was moved again. And at this point, I don't know where I went to. I know I was moved from Center Court to somewhere else, and I don't know where that was. But I was told that I was moved to a triage area in North Parking. And they had set up stations or something. And I was coughing an awful lot, just constantly coughing. And they put me in an ambulance. But the doctor or the physician who was attending me said I couldn't go in the ambulance because there was no oxygen. So they took me out of the ambulance and put me somewhere I don't know. the people out there said they put you in a station wagon, a SUV kind of truck, and then a doctor got in there with you and took you to Arlington Hospital. I can remember being in that station wagon, and I can remember constantly being pounded in the back. Just constant. Somebody was just pounding me in the back. And I can remember trying to open my eyes to see, but it was very difficult because my eyes felt like they had been cooked. And when I opened my eyes, I looked back at the Pentagon and I just saw this big black smoke. And I was trying to kind of figure what happened. Because when it first happened, sorry engineers, but I thought the engineers had done something. Because we were in this new area, and I'm like, oh man, they had done something really bad now. And I was taken on to the hospital, and I could remember first getting some oxygen. I do remember when that mask went on my face, I could finally breathe. And I knew at that point I had to somehow tell somebody to call my husband. And so I used sign language to tell him to call Kirk. But as I was signing, I could feel the lethargic started to come back over me, and I just wanted to go to sleep. So I started writing, you know, kind of doing this in my hand, writing in my hand to ask for something to write with. And someone put a pen in my hand, and I wrote my husband's phone number on one of the doctor's shirts for them to get a hold of my husband. And from there, I don't remember anything until Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday around noon or so when I knew that my husband was there, that I could see him and I could feel him and I could hear him being there.
We'll pause for a moment. Ask your.
Push the window open, you're saying pushing out and essentially breaking the seal on the window. Mm-hmm. Is the window kind of, you know, flapping out from the bottom then, or?
It's like a metal frame, and the window glass was sitting down in the frame, kind of like a picture frame. Mm-hmm. And you know, I don't know how we did that. After we went back and looked at those windows, it seemed impossible.
So, but did the glass fall out?
Well, the glass kind of did this.
Without
it didn't shatter, it didn't, because none of us were cut with glass. It didn't leave any jagged edges on the bottom. It's like the pane just went out like this.
Just sort of bent backwards and up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's strong safety glass. Besides the severe smoke inhalation, did you receive burns?
Yeah, I had burns across the shoulder blades of my back, down like the shins on my legs and on my knees. I had a lot of scratches all over my knees. I had burns on my arm. I had burn on the side of my face, like going to the left side of my face. And somehow I ended up with constricted biceps where my arms wouldn't lower. And then I ended up with a frozen shoulder after my arms wouldn't lower. Somehow I ended up having a cycle for the rest of the month. I don't know what happened. The doctors didn't know. So from about the 12th to the 30th, my cycle wouldn't go on. I think I lost like 12 pounds in 3 days.
Did you remain at Arlington Hospital Center the entire time, or were you transferred to Walter Reed?
I was transferred to Walter Reed.
You mentioned the colonel that was ordered you out. Do you recall, do you know who he was?
Yes. My boss, Colonel McNair,
Do you know his first name?
Philip Field.
Did you find out about the names of any of the ladies that you were with?
Yeah, I know who they all were.
Could you give us those, please?
The lady who grabbed my pants is Lois Stevens.
Stevens?
Yes. The major who was in front of me that I couldn't account for was Major Regina Grant. But she, in fact, did survive it, and she crawled out in a different direction. And the lady who walked up as we were all going out of the window was Olaus Day.
And what about the soldier you saw silhouetted?
Right. I don't remember his first name, but it's Specialist Petrovich.
Actually, I think so far we've interviewed all but Colonel Grant and Colonel Rossow has got him scheduled for this week.
Oh, good.
Her?
No, Philip McNair.
I've spoken with him, and yeah, they gave us a nice written statement. How long was it before you came back to work?
I think it was the 24th, September 24th when I came back.
Wow, that's fast.
Yeah, I had to get back to the building, to face this whole thing and so I could move on.
You said when you regained consciousness, so to speak, on Wednesday, your husband was there.
Yes.
Has he recounted to you how he was notified or who got hold of him?
Yes, he worked at the Navy Yard, and he was in a workshop or something, and they knew that the World Trade Center had been hit. And then someone came in and told him that the workshop was over, that the Pentagon had been hit. And he said his first question was where, and they said at the heliport. And he knew that's where my office was. And he couldn't get off post because the Navy Yard locked everyone down for a couple of hours. And he tried calling my office phone, and he couldn't get me, and he continued to call my cell phone, but the cell phones were down. And eventually when he left the Navy Yard, he went to pick up our daughters, and he went home and he just waited, and he continued to try to call the office. The strange thing was when he called the office right after it happened, he got my voicemail. But he said he called about the second time about 20 minutes afterwards, and he got nothing. So he said about 1:30, a call came in on his cell phone that he needed to call Arlington Hospital immediately because they have someone there who has mentioned his name. And so he called, and he was trying to get the information, is it my wife? And they're like, well, sir, we don't know. We just have someone who wrote this phone number on the shirt and said, call Kirk. So you need to get here. And so he said about 1:30 or 2 o'clock or so, he got to must have been about 2 o'clock or 2:30, he got to the hospital.
That's in the afternoon?
Yes. And he saw Colonel McNair. And he knew that I had a meeting that morning with Colonel McNair. And, but Colonel McNair was being attended, so he didn't go and ask him any questions. And, he went in and asked, who was asking for wills, and they told him she's here, and no, when they called him, they said he needed to get there soon because this person had been burned badly. And so that was his thought, that I had been severely burned and he needed to get there. And so he got there, and I was not conscious when he arrived. And he said that he saw my arms wrapped in the white gauze and asked where had she been burned, because he could see my face and he just saw the burns on here, but where is it that she had been burned? And they told him just on her face, and we saw some burns on her leg and on her arms, but nothing extensive. And he stayed there, and he said that there was nothing. You didn't do anything. You were just there. So he asked the doctors, what was going on, what was some of the problems, and he said they went to say that the lung capacity was very, very limited because, I had inhaled a lot of smoke. I couldn't breathe on my own because my throat had been severely damaged and burned. My eyes, something had done to my eyes, that they had put some white stuff over my eyes so that I couldn't see, I guess so that I couldn't open them because they had smoke in them so bad. They said, but, so they intubated me, and they said, we'll leave it in there for a day or two and see how it comes out. And so I guess Wednesday about noon or so they took it out, but I couldn't talk because it was very painful to talk. And that's how he found out.
I have a sort of, I'm not quite sure how I would characterize the question, but this happened 9-10 months ago now, and you told your story a number of times, and you obviously probably thought about it every day, and I'm wondering if, when you think back, do you focus on perhaps different things now? Do you remember you focus on one thing more than another? I don't even know if that question makes any sense.
I guess, out of all of this, it's just, I guess the hardest part back then, it was crawling to survive. But the hardest part was being at Walter Reed, and because I didn't know what had happened. Because all of us were in a staff meeting at 9 o'clock, and all of these other things transpired while we were in this staff meeting. The World Trade Center had been hit, and I didn't know about that. And then Pennsylvania happened, and I didn't know about that. And then this plane hit the Pentagon and killed just a whole swoop of people, and I didn't know about that. So I think the hardest part of all of it was when my husband had to tell me that my coworker was dead, somebody sitting in my chair had been killed, and all those other people. And I focused on that a lot because I just think if that wasn't a Tuesday morning for that meeting, then I wouldn't be here. And if that had happened. But 9 months have gone by, and I try not to think about it too much. And I do, but when I think about it, I try to think about it in a positive way, that I made it out of there, and other people made it out of there, and that somehow we'll turn this thing around from a tragedy to a triumph and celebrate it in a different way, other than we all sit around crying, singing Kumbaya. But I I used to sit back and think, well, God, why didn't you take me? I mean, you know, all those people are killed and they're gone and they don't have to deal with this. And for us who are left, we're constantly reminded about this thing. Sometimes you don't want to talk about it, but you can't forget it because it happened. So I try now to just look at it in a positive way that I survived it. And I won't ever say that I was responsible for getting other people out of there. I just happen to have been a tool that I will say God used me to help get others out of there. Because it was definitely through no strength of my own. Because at one point I thought I was in there by myself. And so when the lady grabbed my pants, I knew, I'm like, God, thank you, because I'm not in here by myself. Now I'm in here for her. So I try to turn it around and look at it positively. So I hope that kind of answered what you're asking.
Did other people in that conference room get out?
Not everybody. We lost 2 people in there. A gentleman that was sitting not directly across from me, but across and to the right on the opposite side of the table, we lost him. And then the gentleman who was sitting right to Colonel McNair's left was lost. But strangely enough, the guy who was sitting right in front of me got up from out of the meeting. He said the good news is it's being recounted, it's being put into print. And you know, I even though I didn't come back to work on the 12th, I think it was a good decision that our leaders made. And I say that because some of us who were hospitalized on the 12th were reassured that this didn't just take us all out and that we were just going to fall on our face and turn over and die. And then it showed the American people that, you know, this is what we're paid to do, if you will. We never would have thought it sitting in a building in the Pentagon, but that's what we're paid to do. So some people have just made a major discussion as, I can't believe you would say that, but we have to show our Americans that, you know, we're in this building, but we're part of the Department of Defense. I'm a soldier. If this had happened in Germany, we would have done the same thing. If this had happened in Kosovo, we would have done the same thing. Not to let some cowardly act, like those cowards did on the 11th, make us lay down and just continue to weep and waddle in our sorrows forever. And then also for a building like the Pentagon and any other government building, we as Americans have just been so laid back on our security, and there are things that, you know, and we know things are out there that can help improve the security of our buildings. You know, as we crawled out of there, we couldn't see anything. And something as simple as lights on the floor, like on an airplane, would have guided us out of that building. You know, just little simple things that when they're putting buildings together, think about the employees, not about money, not about what it's going to cost, but think about people who are going to occupy those buildings. You know, when that first plane hit the Twin Towers, why weren't we notified in this building? It's a government building. Why weren't other government buildings notified? And I'm also told, because it hit at the 4th corridor, people at the 10th corridor didn't even know. They didn't know. And that is just absurd. And since we've been back to the building, there was a paint and gas or something was mixed together over on the 10th corridor. You know how I found out about it? I was watching CNN. And the Pentagon is being evacuated. And I'm sitting in my office in the Pentagon going, what? So I walked down to the guard. He's like, yeah, that's just the 10th corridor, though. I mean, that makes sense. So some of those improvements I think we need to make as an institution here in the building, but also look at some other government buildings. But that's all I have that I can think of.
Okay. Thank you. Really appreciate you taking your time and effort to do this with us.
You're welcome.